Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys have had a wonderful week. I have had a pretty stressful week, so that's why this video is titled Talking All About Detachment, because I've been feeling very stressed. And what I've noticed is that actually the thing that is adding to my stress the most is my reaction to the stress itself, or my assumptions on what other people are saying and the way that they're saying it. I really just wanted to learn about this gap between stimulus and response, the control of that gap, and why that gap shortens, and how I can help myself, because yeah, I've been very stressed. So also, do we like this little granny? It's a bit too big for me, but I'm not sure if this is too granny old vibe, or if this is like perfect business casual, or work for BHS 20 years ago and this was my uniform. So I'll let you guys decide that. This is probably best described as when you talk to your partner and either something they said or the way that their face looked lands really wrong, and you get really stressed, really angry, really annoyed, and you start convincing and telling yourself this whole story of like they don't care, they don't want to make an effort, there's some like massive issue or something massively wrong with them. But in essence, you're basically just reacting to a version of your partner or your colleague or your situation that could be potentially made up. Like, what if there was a way that you didn't need to be disturbed by this at all, and you could just observe what is happening to you without being pulled down underneath it, and instead reflect and observe them without reaction? And this is what we call detachment. Detachment. Centuries ago, Stoic philosophers already talked about this. There was a Stoic philosopher named Epictetus, and he mentioned something at the time that was very radical, and that was that people are not disturbed by things, they are disturbed by the reaction to those things. So what I was talking about earlier, in that if you're hurt or someone's upset you, it's not what happens to you, but it's actually how you feel about what has happened to you. So there's some kind of in-between gap between the event, the action, the stimulus, whatever you want to call it, and your physical, emotional reaction to it. So the response, let's say. Best described through the lens of Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, and he was talking about how when he was having his absolute darkest moments in concentration camps, one thing that he realized is he couldn't control his environment, he couldn't control what the Nazis were doing to him, but the one thing that he could choose was how it affected him, i.e. the response that he was having to it. That was where his freedom lived. Just a couple of years after that, there was also this psychologist named Albert Ellis. He actually realized that the Stoics were onto something, and he decided to build out this framework, which we now call rational emotive behavior therapy. Essentially, the ABCs. So A being the activating event, the thing that happens to you, the stimulus, the upset, and then B being your belief about it. So the story that you tell yourself about how that has influenced you, or the way that someone's treating you. And then C is the consequence, so i.e. how you act. So the gap is actually B. And I think this is a really interesting point on the beliefs and stories you tell yourself, and the fact that some things can actually become like self-fulfilling prophecies. I'm finding it hard even now to record because of the story I'm telling myself. I'm finding it hard to record, if that makes sense, rather than just being like, people will respect and understand that I'm just one opinion of many, and I don't have to be sort of anything more than the conscious state of explaining my situation and explaining the preparation and research I've done for this video. This is hard, guys. This is really hard. But it's crazy how much you can be your own biggest enemy. You are the villain in your own story because you've told yourself such a negative story about yourself based on everything that happened to you. But you have ultimate control over that. Nobody else can take that away from you, and I do think that's really exciting, but I do think it's really hard to get to that first point. When I was researching this, I was learning about this gap. I don't know if it's because I've become so productivity pilled from the work and corporate life that I inhabit right now, but I was questioning and querying what's the like optimal gap that I can have for maximal efficiency, where I make sure that I don't like just respond like this animal and stuff, but that I can really quickly move through life and keep learning, keep growing, keep improving. And there is no research on that currently. What we do know is that it's the quality of the space that matters the most, not necessarily the length of the space, and that it's flexible. So you can help build that gap even when you've been someone that's had a quite reactive and stressful, intense life. This is going to fluctuate throughout your life, throughout the months, throughout the weeks, throughout the years. The skill is not stopping it. The skill is just recognizing it after it's happened and noticing that, okay, my tolerance is actually quite low right now. And when you notice that, you can finally start the process of healing yourself, bringing your nervous system back to calmness, back to stillness. When we talk about detachment, I'm not actually talking about some kind of mental and emotional and physical numbness or non-verbal state or not reacting at all, which is what I mentioned in my previous video, where you kind of just have this blank or blip. What I'm actually talking about is what the Stoics called equanimity. So kind of like a psychological stability or mental calmness or expansive or opening space. Sometimes people describe this as this idea of letting go of the outcome that you were expecting to see, whatever you want to call it, composure, equanimity, mindfulness. It's about being able to know that the situation that you're in isn't a reflection of who you are as a person or the kind of story or identity that you've given it to, Detachment is about being able to be so present and grounded in yourself that everything can happen and go crazy around you, but that won't knock you off your center. You still feel everything and you still care really deeply, but you don't get completely consumed by things. I think people best describe this as the idea of the immovable mountain, and that you are so unshakable to anything that's going to become your way because you trust yourself so deeply and you know that you have control over your response to things. So why do we do this? I think, first of all, because we want our suffering and our hurt and our pain to mean something. We want to believe that there is some kind of wider reason why someone would treat me that way. But the truth is, sometimes in life it's really, really boring and it's not as glamorous and exciting. When you feel like it isn't exciting, you feel like there was literally no justice and no reason to why you suffered it. But that's life, babe. Like, that is life. And sometimes it is really simple, the reasons why you've been hurt. Maybe your partner just wasn't very secure. He wasn't good at communicating, couldn't tell you what he needed. You guys had some kind of dynamics that just clashed really badly together. Maybe you weren't very nice. Maybe you weren't the best person that you could have been in certain situations. Obviously, there's like distinctions in that, and I don't want to justify people that have done horrible, horrible things to you. But I think my point is more that we make our own reason to the existence of life and why we're here on this planet. So you should probably try to shape that in a way that's going to serve you best. Genuinely, oftentimes, the narrative that we build about something does more damage than the actual thing itself did. I love this book because the biggest thing that it helped me understand was that your beliefs don't just colour things that happen to you after they happen to you, but also that they shape what actually ends up happening in the first place. If you walk into a conversation, for example, believing that the other person is against you, you're going to show up guarded, you're going to shift the way that you speak, you're going to perceive the way that they're talking about something as some other hidden message, and then ultimately that person is going to know that you are coming across guarded and is going to shift their behaviour because of it. Again, like I was saying, this is a complete self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, you are the one that is creating that own reality in your own head and through your actions. Much of this is about giving up control and understanding that you don't have influence on as many things as you think you do, and the actual only thing that you do have control and influence over is the story you tell yourself and the reaction to the story that you tell yourself. I started meditating at the start of this year and I got really good at it. I got really good at like finally sitting through and like working through that emotion that I've been not allowing myself the space to process in the day. But then I started getting addicted to this controlled version of how that meditation was when it would work out well and I would finally find a release. So I almost had this addiction to this controlled outcome. Because I was doing that, my meditation actually got so much worse and I actually hated it even more. Control and expecting an outcome can actually make things way, way worse. Become detached to this idea that if I put this effort in, this response will happen, because you don't have control over that. All you have control over is the amount of effort that you put in. So like, how do you get there? Like, how do you actually widen the gap between having a horrible thing happen to you or really struggling with something and then letting go of your response to the belief or the story that you've told yourself, and also widening that gap, you know, so you're not being like super reactive and you're having more time to sit down, relax and observe. I feel like you guys are gonna get really sick of me saying this because I think this is what I say every fucking video, but obviously meditation and mindfulness, which again, I've really struggled with. I'm not some saint. I literally struggle with this every single day. But yeah, I do think it's important to do meditation and mindfulness. Essentially, you're just strengthening the connection between the thinking part of your brain and the emotional alarm reactive system, which over time, thankfully, lets that gap become a lot wider. So meditation, I'd really recommend finding things that ground you. When that gap collapses, you're not going to be able to necessarily get it back with more thinking. You're on overload, your nervous system is on overload. And I think for me, most of the time in myself, in my own life, I recognize that thinking almost just makes me spiral even more. Finding a way to get back into the body without third-personing yourself is maybe the best way I would describe it. Definitely one of the ways that you can do that is through the senses. So something you can touch, taking a bath, temperature, taking a minute to recognize your breath and your breathing work. One thing that's really helped me is the idea of scents. I just find this to be a really nice and easy and cheap way to bring yourself back to nice memories. You can just light a candle that might be the same candle that you lit on holiday, and suddenly you can remind yourself of like, life is okay and you just had a bad day and things will move on. The second one is, and fuck me do I struggle with this one, but task batching and protecting your attention. When I was thinking about doing this video this week, I was thinking about how much this gap has reduced for me at work, in particular with the use of AI and prompting one workflow and another workflow and another workflow and another workflow, and context switching between someone emailing you, someone messaging you on Slack, not having like any space to breathe. How I was feeling was I was becoming some kind of like animal in a cage that was just getting like baited into response and not able to actually control my impulses and control my reaction to things. Every time you context switch, you deplete your prefrontal cortex. You are just doing that all the time when someone drops you a Slack message, when someone drops you an email. So you need to work really hard to sit with a particular focus or task and block out all of the noise. Like, do not let anyone get to you, and they don't deserve to get to you. Like, Like, they don't. They literally don't. Nobody's dying. Nobody's dying, okay? Even nurses at the hospital need their lunch break and deserve their lunch break, even when they hear everyone going crazy. So do you, okay? No one is actually going to be angry at you for the fact that you're taking some time out, blocking out the noise, blocking out the notifications, and doing your job. And if they do, I think it's time for you to fucking change your job. Okay, number 3 is sleep. Probably this whole video should just be like, get good sleep. Get good sleep, okay? When you're sleep deprived, you're literally running on amygdala. You're running on, I am an animal, I am being poked, I am reactive. Like, rah, rah, rah. You get grouchy, you get grumpy, you just feel like a bit of an animal that doesn't have that gap or that pause and starts being reactive. Set a good schedule, make sure you stick to that schedule, have a good nighttime routine. One thing that I've been including in my life is journaling either every morning and every night and having a prompt in my journal. So I've been including in my mornings to just sit down and be like, did I sleep well? Yes, I did. And I can tell that that's made an actionable difference. And that's one thing that's helped me with my sleep. It's important to continue to reflect and keep reminding yourself, because as humans, we do forget. It's kind of just a condition of dealing with difficult things. It's good that we forget things because some things are difficult, but sometimes we forget the good things and we forget how good sleep is for us. Number 4, 5, I actually don't know where we are at, is stillness. I haven't talked about this yet, but there is a activist called Brene Brown, and she talks about how when she finally got sober, it allowed her to have this stillness to be able to sort of pry open that gap. I read in another book ages ago about how the Queen handled all of the pressure of everything that she was dealing with, and she would spend just long times in stillness and silence and gathering herself and sitting with herself. When you are being pulled in 100 different directions, it does feel like you as a person begin to fragment and you can't find a singular thread of security in who you are and how you feel about something. I don't think this is meditating. I think this is really finding time for large parts of your day, like an hour of your day where you have no pressure to do anything, because I think it's in that gap that you actually live. That's when life happens, is in those moments of, I can go for a walk, I can go weed, I can pick up that task that I wanted to do, not because it's like some massive pressure that I put on myself, but just because it's come to me in the moment and that's how I feel about it. Yeah, I think it's just really, really, really important. My next one is to very thoroughly diversify your emotional assets. The way that we're told to handle money is to never put all of your investment into one stock or all of your eggs into one basket, because obviously if that thing crashes, then you're not going to be okay. Your emotional life works in exactly the same way. If your entire sense of okayness and how you see the world and your identity is dependent on one particular thing, so like your job, your relationship, your hobby, even just having one bad day in that area, like one bad day at work, one particular fight in a relationship makes you panic and feel like your life is. I would call this detachment from over-identification. Your sense of self is not reliant on any one particular thing, and so it can't just crash and burn the minute that you break up with someone or you get made redundant or your project doesn't go the way that you want it to. You can care really deeply about things, you can care really deeply about your partner, about your job, and still be able to have a bad day and not let a bad meeting or an argument or a fight define you. Make sure that you spread your emotional interests and life across many different things. The next one is to learn about your external versus internal locus of self-control. Most people fall somewhere on a spectrum. On one end, you've got an external locus, which means that you basically believe that everything that happens to you is down to luck. On the other hand, you have an internal locus or internal sense of self-control. So you believe that your actions, your story, and your choices shape your outcomes. If you're going to become someone that is operating from a more internal locus, you know that you have the control and the power to change your reaction and response to things. Tell yourself, you know, what part of this is actually under my influence and what part isn't. Not necessarily this whole like, whose fault is it that this happened or how we got into this position in the first place, but literally, what can I actually influence, and therefore I know exactly what I need to worry and focus on to the degree that I actually get that stuff done and I don't waste any more energy on things that are well out of my control. Every time that you decide that you have control over it and take the action over it, you're proving to yourself that you have agency. That's often the shift that people talk about, which is that life then begins happening for them rather than happening to them. Once you do notice that, okay, that gap has been really small, I've been really reactive, I haven't realized like how much I've just been going on impulse, in order to get through that, you're going to have to process it in your body somatically, tell your nervous system that everything has passed, the threat is no longer there, you don't need to stress, you don't need to be in those kind of physical and anxious states anymore. Annoyingly for me, because I'm someone that likes to avoid my emotions, there is really no way out of this though. I've spoken about what you should be carrying, i.e. having agency and control over your life, but there is also one thing that you shouldn't be carrying, and I think in my mind that is not being responsible for someone that can't communicate and advocate for themselves. In a situation like a mutual relationship or friendship, you need to remind yourself that you are not a mind reader. Sorry, but that science hasn't been figured out yet. So you should not be expected to understand and figure out all of these things and worry about like why someone looked that way or like why someone responded that way. If someone's upset with you and they're not saying why, or they've expected or had some like ridiculous expectation for you, but they never said what that expectation was out loud and then punished you because you didn't meet it, then that is not your job. That's not being kind and having empathy for someone. That is literally doing the work of all of the relationship for someone, that the work of all of their emotional processing for themselves. God, I can feel myself getting angry. This one is close to heart. God, ooh. It's sad. It's not nice to see someone who can't communicate for themselves, and it's really heartbreaking, but that's something that you can't control. You can't be setting a boundary around information that you were just never given. Like
How are you supposed to do that? You can't, right? I think the last thing I want to leave you guys with is that you're not going to think your way into being this person. Just watching something and thinking and dreaming about the goals and the person that you want to be isn't doing it. So that belief in yourself is going to come after you do the action. You don't need to be that person yet. You already are. You are always that person. When you show up for yourself every single day, every time that you are able to pause when someone has annoyed you or irritated you and not react, every time that you do that, you're gathering data points, and those data points become a real story or proof that you are becoming who you want to become.
Yeah, so the next time that something is happening to you and something lands wrong, or you're going down that sort of spiral, what you should do is first of all notice that moment. Know that there's actually a gap there. It might not feel very big right now because you are cognitively overloaded or you haven't protected your space enough, but with practice you can make that wider, and the wider that gap gets, the more you get to choose whether you are disturbed or upset or not, and the more you are detached and feel a sense of lightness and brevity and freedom in your life. I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, please do give it a like or subscribe, drop a comment, share all the goodness, good tips that you have below, as that's what I want this community to start being. Otherwise, just have a wonderful rest of your week, take some time, take some stillness, and I will catch you in the next one.